where do you find your sources of courage?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, there's so much in that that's really important. I mean, first of all, there's too much pressure on us to be good. Like, there's way too much pressure on us to be good. And we have to repeat these ancient wisdoms to ourselves about the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, Solzhenitsyn. Or sorry, is that Dostoevsky?
I think it's Solzhenitsyn.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
It's like Mark Twain. Forget about it. It's Mark Twain. Like, and Nietzsche has it too, and it's Jesus says it, and I think it's hard, but I think it's also, it means also then if you really believe that, then also you're a little bit more forgiving of others, and you open more space up for people to be wrong and not punish them, and to be forgiving, including of yourself. So those are all very, very important practices. I mean, the other one I really love is the one about how it's not courageous if you're not scared. Like, courage, people are always like, you must be fearless. It's like, oh no. No, that's not it. It's like, it's not courage if you're like, I'm unafraid of it. Then it's like, then there's nothing at stake. You do it because you do it when you're scared. So, I mean, there's a calculation that goes involved in it, first of all. Like, the people that were hiding Jews in their attic in Germany, or in Poland, or whatever, hiding them in the cellar, the people that were doing that, yes, were they more empathic to their Jewish neighbors? For sure. But they're also calculating, can I talk my way out of this? And I think you don't underestimate that either. That courage, it's not, sometimes it gets presented as a sort of like, just, just do you have it or not? And are you,
Are you a warrior?
Are you a warrior? Not just pound you. No. Like, you don't want to get killed, and you don't want to lose all your friends. Now, that may be a consequence, one of the consequences of what happens. But I do think, the decline of courage in the society and the declining appreciation of it as a virtue. I just saw the Solzhenitsyn. Someone did a Twitter thread on the Solzhenitsyn's Harvard address, I think, and that was part of it. It was like the decline of courage and as this really essential virtue to teach people. And so, it's not something you can moralize against. It's definitely something that has to be inculcated in kids, and they have to be taught to take risks. I mean, I worry about it because I do think that kids that were raised on social media, they have that fishbowl effect. And so there's so much anxiety around risk-taking. This is something that that Abigail Schreier and Joe Rogan were talking about, where we're not seeing the entrepreneurial, we're not seeing the risk-taking, but we're seeing a much, much greater fear of failure. So something's got to be done to reassure people that it all just comes with just huge quantities of failure. Like, there's no successful person that didn't have a fair amount of failure along the way and found, and usually the greater the success, the more significant failures they had. I mean, really, it's awful. It's so cliche. It's so cringe at this point to have to talk about it, but it's just like, it's all about the adversity. It's all about the test. If that's not occurring, then be worried. It's the overprotectionism and the coddling are in some ways at the heart of our culture's biggest problems.
This show began life as a documentary that I was working on called, the working title was The Kids Are Not All Right. And it was inspired in part by experiences I was witnessing from my son, who's now 19, but at the time was in the beginning of middle school. And he was doing great, but a lot of his peers were like really nervous. Like, what are you nervous about? You're like, you're well-off kids. You're like, what's the problem here?
Yeah.
But really, seriously, like, suffering from anxiety that I didn't I couldn't relate to as like a Gen Xer.
Right.
The forgotten generation, Gen X.
Yeah.
We're all boomers according to everybody.
No. No, we're having Gen Xers having a moment right now. I think we're having a moment right now. So I
think Gen X.
Protect that.
It's our time.
Yeah.
To assert our existence.
It's our time to rule.
Don't worry. It'll be a very narrow.
Yeah, it won't last long, but yeah.
We'll have Winona Ryder by our side.
Yeah.
But and then The Coddling of the American Mind. That book.
Yeah.
Articulated a lot of what just struck a nerve in me. That how are you going to have a free society if there's a generation that hasn't practiced mastering their own agency? You're a father. How has thinking about these kind of things changed the way you approach fatherhood? I
mean, it really came because I was raised like that. I mean, I was raised by parents that were like, life's not fair. It's not fair. Life's not fair. That was like it from the beginning. Yeah. They were really good because they had a philosophy, and it came from a German parenting. It was not Spock. It was Dreiker's, and it was about a couple of things: logical and natural consequences for behaviors, good and bad, and that do not protect your kids from logical and natural consequences of behaviors. And then don't do anything for your kids that they can do for themselves. So it would be, you want a snack? Well, push the chair over to the counter in the kitchen and you climb up, and you're little toddlers. So, I mean, yeah, it's like all like little kids can chop vegetables. I mean, it's at very young ages, by the way. I mean, little kids can clean, so for sure that was always something I wanted to see the kids participating in, was the cooking and the cleaning. I wanted to do more of it. Your kids are not entirely your own. You're not able to do it all. So, but I think it's huge, like I love when you go to Japan and you're at the restaurant, it's like, there's the top chef, he's the top chef, but he is washing, he's cleaning, he's doing the dishes. Like there's that part of the work I think is so essential. So yeah, I mean, but when I was still on the left, and identified on the left, I still was really had in conflict with parenting culture in Berkeley, which was already that helicopter parenting, that overprotect, and then the moralizing on top of it. So if you were like, I'm not into that, and as opposed to being like, well, you do it differently,
you're a bad person,
then you're a bad parent. And then of course for the mothers in particular, being called a bad mother, it's like the worst thing you can say about a mom. So it's very, very hard. I mean, I think that there has been a lot of pushback on it. The French parenting, the kind of there's been, where there's an awareness of it. Feels like it still hasn't quite broken yet.
No, I think there's a couple forces at work. It's funny, you were talking about your German descent upbringing. There's a book called, I think it's Achtung Baby, about an American who moved to Germany and gave birth to her kids in Germany, or they were very, very young. So for the first 8 years of their childhood, she was in Germany, and then they moved back to the States, and not to Berkeley, to Idaho. She's like, oh my God, Germany's a freer country than America. Like her experience of the anxiety and the overprotection and the safetyism and
was there in Idaho even.
It was in Idaho.
Yeah.
Like, what are you leaving your kids at the park by yourself? Like, what's wrong with you? What are you like?
Right.
This is neglect. Like, let's call the cops.
Right.
It's like, well, he's 9.
Well, how about the Danes who just leave the baby strollers outside the restaurant while they go inside the restaurant and have dinner? I mean, it's amazing.
This is something that I find hard to grapple with in an age where there are people that need therapy. But we got here as a species through some really hard stuff.
Oh, for sure.
For hundreds of thousands of years, most of which was traumatic at almost every step. And we didn't necessarily have a whole lot of therapy.
Right.
And we're still here. And I don't think I've got some equilibrium on the where is that useful and where is it not? Is the body keeping the score? What does that even mean? And how do you think about that? Because it does feel like this therapeutic mindset. It's a big part of the pathologies in the homelessness issue.
Yes.
So how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's all the same thing. It really is. I mean, one of the interesting things for me was always like, why is it that the Christians in the society, and Jews and Christians really, seem like they're the stricter ones, when Christianity in particular was all about being compassionate, and it was the big correction to the Old Testament. It was Jesus being compassionate and helping the poor, and there was St. Francis. Well, it's because actually there was always a big Stoic core inside of Christianity, and that was really what started falling apart over the last several hundred years. If you kind of start with Rousseau's advocacy of coddling your children up until now. I mean, in some ways it's a slow process. Some ways it's obviously accelerated. But yeah, I mean, the basic Stoic principles are there in Judaism, they're there in Christianity, they're there in Hinduism. You look at Indian parents and how they raise their kids. And
it can go too far, and you
oh, for sure,
push your kid to be a doctor to such an extent that they jump over a gulch in Cornell.
Yeah, for sure. And you would even argue, I mean, one might even argue that you'd be getting into a violation of the Stoic principles, which are then also trying to support individual agency. And so when the parents are over-involved, you can be over-involved in coddling, you can also be over-involved in demanding that they pursue a particular career and not making choices for themselves. So I do think there is clearly a Stoic middle path. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not that it's not the victimhood ideology, which is really what's taken over. So for me, that is like the main event in the culture, and I see it's just driving everything. It then gets picked up and turned into an ideology and a dogma in politics, and that is what that is what wokeism. When people are always like, "What is wokeism?" I think that is at the heart of it. It is victimhood ideology. It's both the idea that some people are victims and other people are not, but it's also the idea that if you are a victim, then the best thing for you is to be coddled and sheltered and to be shielded from the consequences of your own action. That's not true either. I mean, the better view, my view, is this older Joseph Campbell hero's journey view, where the process of maturation is a process of being victimized and suffering and going through adversity and then coming out of it a wiser, more mature, and stronger individual. But there's been a strong effort. I mean, that's why when I say my book is Why Elites Subvert Civilization, it gets at that entropy to some extent, that coddling, that decadence that sets in inevitably, I think, really with most civilizations, all civilizations, really.
My son in 7th grade read a book by choice that I just read last summer, and it is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
One of my favorite books. Yeah.
And the thing that's so crazy, because he read that and Meditations. He was going to Acton Academy, which is like radical Montessori on steroids. The guides are not allowed to answer questions. So they had to read a deep book. They had a bunch to choose from. He picked those two kind of in succession. He came out the other end of just reading those books like transformed.
Wow. Amazing.
And so last summer I was like, maybe I didn't read this book. I thought I did in college, but let me reread it. And it feels like the book of our times.
Oh, it's incredible.
So why do you love it?
Oh, I mean, so I have a long relationship with Viktor Frankl, but I came to him right as COVID hit, and I was a little bit depressed. I mean, I don't want to say depressed because that would make it too grand, but it was just feeling like like what am I doing? And I was supposed to travel and all home, and then I started watching Viktor Frankl. There were videos of Viktor Frankl on YouTube. I mean,
I haven't even seen this.
Oh God, they're incredible. Like, he did one in Berkeley in the 60s. And I remember seeing it, and it was just the classic Viktor Frankl. It's all about mentality. I was also I'm still into Liverpool, and they had a new coach at the time, and he was always about mentality. And you could see soccer as a physical game. It's a mental game.
I think every game is a mental game.
Every game is a mental game. Everything's mental. And so yeah, you read that, I start watching these videos, and I'd be like, wow, I feel better watching the videos. The video is performing cognitive behavioral therapy on me. And then he was also very good about, you need a goal, not just a life goal. Like, you need a goal right now, like you need something to do. And I was like, oh, I need something to do. So then I did the book contract for San Francisco, and I was off to the races. I knew that COVID was just going to be this is going to be shut down for a while. So I needed something to do in that period. I needed something, and I'm always like that. If I have a high need for that. I need something to chase after. And so it's the pursuit, and I think that was one of the big lessons, from that, was just having the pursuit. The happiness is a byproduct of pursuing something that gives you purpose.
You don't pursue happiness; it ensues.
Yes, that's a very nice way of putting it.
It's that's him. I can take zero credit.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, but he's full of those. I went and read all of his books. I read Man's Search for Meaning, and then I went and read all of his obscure essays, and I was like, this is. And of course, it's funny because you're like, it's just so simple. Like, why do you need, how much more is there to say about it? But it didn't matter. It was very satisfying for me. And that was at a late stage. I mean, I'd already known him and read him, and it still benefits me.
Mankind has a final freedom, and that is the freedom to choose how to respond to your circumstances. So the first half of the book, it's about going through all the worst concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and observing the difference in those who could hold on to their sanity and those who couldn't. And he's basically saying, even if you're in a concentration camp, you still have the final freedom. And it has struck me that is not the final freedom. That is the first freedom. That is the foundation of freedom, is recognizing that, no, I have to choose how to respond.
Yes.
And that feels like the vaccine to victimhood. It is the antidote.
Right. And what's funny is how central that is to liberal pop psychology, and so even in the 60s, like, that was the human potential movement. It's called the human potential movement, and it is Viktor Frankl, and it's Maslow, and it's Fritz Perls, and it's all these people that
I'd even say it's Ayn Rand.
And Ayn Rand, yeah, for sure. On the right, these other characters were more associated with the left, with Esalen, with Big Sur, with hot tubs and sunsets and whales and LSD. But certainly even in the psychedelic culture, there's some freeing your mind. That's what that was. It was this experience of, I don't have to do really anything. All you have to really do is die. That's the only thing you have to do. That means everything else is open up. All these possibilities open up. And then it's really up to you. And then you get to the politics, the left-wing politics, and it's the exact opposite. It's that you're completely determined by your race and gender and class, and it's just awful. It's a totally oppressive. And I was trying to figure out, how did that happen? Like, how do you go from this totally liberating ideology in the progressive culture and left to this just awful, disempowering, dispiriting ideology that Viktor Frankl would have hated? Like, how did that occur? So, I mean,
how did it occur?
How did it occur? And so, well, I will say the fact that it did occur also means that I think it doesn't have to go that way. You can fight back against it. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a bunch of, some of it is the coddling culture. Some of it is entropy. It's just easier to be lazy. It's just easier to, I love Instagram. Like, it's easier to go through the Instagram reels. They're amazing. Like, I watch parkour, I'm like, this is fantastic. It's just easier to do that than it is to get yourself up and sit down and write a book. That is hard. So there is just something about the energetics of it. And then the prosperity, it means that,
wealth disease. We're just lazy. It's
like, you don't have to do it. Like my kids, it's like, it's like, what do you want for Christmas? I don't know. I got everything I need. I mean, it's kind of nice in that way, but it is like, there's not that pressure that you need in order to go and make a life. So I think all those things have something to do with it. It's going to have to come back through language and through podcasts. I mean, maybe we'll have some awful financial crisis. It'd be great in some ways if you did, or some awful external shock or something to make people have to do it. But I just think we can't count on that. And it means that you are going to have to rely on this kind of conversation and people changing how they raise their kids and opting out of these toxic, disempowering, parenting cultures that have really taken over, at least among kind of elite and upper middle class cultures.
The other things interesting in Frankl, and it led me to want to explore this more. I haven't really yet, but he's talking about the comfort and the coddling of the generation in the 50s.
Right.
And I've talked to some other friends who've got more time on their hands, I think, who have said, this is the perennial problem, the sense of the sort of decadent coddling, sort of getting lazy. This is not new. This is not new to our time now. This is part of this, whether it's cyclical or what, it's something that kind of might be cyclical going on.
Yes. Although one point, I'll just jump in if you don't mind, was that, and not to, again, we're obviously biased because we're Gen Xers, but what happened with the Gen Xers is that the boomers who were raised with mom at home, mom was at home for the 1945 to 1965, 1970. Mom's at home. You get to feminism, and women also changes to the economy, but for whatever reason, a significant share of the moms leave. And it's also not just that everybody's mom was not at home when the kids came home from school. We weren't all latchkey kids, but the ones whose parents weren't home would bring the kids whose moms were home, and then their moms who were coddling them, they would escape the mom, and we would go in the house, and you'd have this what John Haidt and they all talk about is this unstructured play is so important.
Peter Gray is great on this.
So he's great on this, and so we were out there. Look, we did crazy things, right? We set things on fire, and there was sex. There's a lot more early. There's a lot younger sex and drug experimentation going on with Gen Xers than there are with kids today. In some ways, thank God that's the case, because like my kids are like
I know.
I didn't have to see them do that, but it's like, you watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High and you're like, I can't believe how young they are when they're doing all these things. But that did, I think, provide that some amount of that adversity that I think kids that came after us and even that boomers before us didn't have.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.